We're going to talk about fueling to train your best so that you can compete your best when competition comes. So I'm going to start by just listing a handful of common complaints that I get from gymnasts that I have worked with over the years. They've come to me and they've had complaints and issues like they're burning out before the end of their long practices, they're getting dizzy, they're seeing reoccurring injuries, things like stress reactions and stress fractures. They're experiencing chronic fatigue. So that would be like fatigue, not just after a long training session, but even outside of that. They're having trouble building muscle. Some of them are feeling frustrated that they're not advancing to the next level and mastering new skills. They may even be experiencing increased anxiety or changes in mood that's very different from their norm. And I like to point out that these could very well be other underlying things going on, but it could also very well be tied to nutrition. I've actually worked with a lot of gymnasts and we improve their nutrition and their fueling, and a lot of these complaints go way down or they go away. And so it's really important that we see the tie between these complaints and these issues and nutrition. And I bring this up because showing up to practice and experiencing any or one or all of these symptoms listed here does not allow you to practice at your peak. And if we're not showing up to the gym, we're not showing up to training sessions at our best and in our best condition, then it's going to be really hard to perform our best when competition comes. So, tonight, what I want to focus on are 4 key nutrition practices that you can start implementing tonight or today that are going to optimize your training and help you feel your best so that you can perform your best. So, the 4 key nutrition practices that I want to talk about today are first and foremost, we want to create a simple but important foundation. You may, when we get to this one, you may look at it and say, gosh, this looks really small, but it can make a really huge impact. And so we want to start there. The second key principle and practice that we want to work on is making sure we have some key micronutrients included in our daily intake. Then we're going to do what I like to call an energy availability check, and we'll go into detail on that in a minute. And then we are going to work on developing a clear performance nutrition strategy, and we're going to practice it and know what works so that there's no surprises when we show up to competition and to our meets. If you can start these things and really start implementing them in your day to day and make it routine and make it habit, you are going to feel more energized. You're going to feel more powerful. It's going to help you improve your strength. It can help prevent injury. And if you do experience an injury, it can help improve recovery time. And it's going to support your mental well being because we know that I really say an undernourished brain is a stressed brain and it's an anxious brain. And it's hard to perform well and do our best when we're feeling that way. So let's dive into the first practice, and that is this simple but important foundation. When I say this, what I want you to do is think about how do I eat every day? How many meals am I eating? How many snacks am I eating? You, as a high level gymnast, need to be eating 3 meals and 3 snacks a day. So, some of you sitting here listening to the call and to the presentation may think, "I already do that. I get 3 meals, I get 3 snacks, and that's great. Keep doing what you're doing." You can kind of watch this and listen, and then we'll move on to the next practice. But some of you may not be. A lot of athletes that I work with are not getting their 3 meals and their 3 snacks. So that's the first thing we want to make sure you're doing as a high level gymnast. When I'm saying I want you to get a meal, I want you to just think of the 6 food groups and I want you to make sure that there are at least 3 different food groups in a meal. You can have all 6 of them, that's wonderful. But at a minimum, I want you to have 3 food groups in the meal. And when I say snack, I want you to have 2 different food groups in a snack. And the key is that when you get to the end of your day, so you've had your meals and snacks and you're about to go to bed at night, I want you to look back over your intake and I want you to see, did I get foods from every food group? Was every food group represented in my day? And this is a really simple thing that you can do to help ensure you're getting all the nutrients you need. It's probably going to increase your protein. It's going to get it more structured throughout your day. It's going to increase your quality carbohydrates. You're going to get the antioxidants that you need, and it is going to help you get what you need and improve your intake without you getting just stuck in the details and really bogged down in numbers and grams and things like that. You're going to feel and see a difference just doing this. So I'm not going to teach on the macronutrients and the food groups tonight, but I did do just a little 101 refresh. And so that's for just your FYI if you needed that. Some of you may be thinking, okay, well, what can I do with this? This is great, but I need something a little bit more tangible. And to that, I would give you this example. So this is something I do with a lot of my athletes when I work with them, and it is a way to build this initial foundation to start optimizing your total nutrition before you start getting into the details. What you can do is make a chart, and what I want you to do is write each food group at the top of the columns. You've got 6 columns. I want you to put one food group at the top of each column, and then I want you to think about your top foods in each category. And I want you to write down what are my favorite foods in each category, or what are foods I love, and if I had access to them, I would enjoy eating them. The key is that you don't want anything on here that you don't like, and no foods that you hate, nothing like I have to hold my nose to eat it. That doesn't go on the list because then that's not very doable. So we want this to be foods that you like, you enjoy, or you're open to try. Okay, so that's the first part. And then from there, you're going to build your meals and snacks. And I've got some examples at the bottom of here. So remember I said for a meal, I want you to get at least 3 different food groups at a meal. So for example, breakfast could be a bagel, which is your grain starch. You've got almond butter, which is going to be a healthy fat. You've got Greek yogurt, which I really include as 2 food groups. It's dairy, but because it's so high in protein, sometimes I'll include it as a meat as well. And so that's just one example. So you can go through that and create a few breakfast ideas, a few lunch ideas, a few dinner ideas, and then some snack ideas using that strategy. In my pre-submitted questions, I got a few that were about, how do I help improve the nutrition and fueling of my picky eater, or have a picky eater and it's hard to figure out foods to eat that they like. And so this is what I would actually do if you are someone who, if you're a parent listening that has a picky eater, or if you are an athlete that knows there's not a ton of foods out there that you love, this is a great idea. So you put things you like in here, and then you think through what are foods I'm open to trying. And so maybe part of the work you do is trying some new foods to see if you can get a few in one of the columns that may be harder for you. But that's a tool I use with a lot of my picky eaters. So after we've built this solid foundation, you've created your chart, you've got your foods, you've got some meal ideas and snacks, and you've tried them out and you know you like them, then I like to move on and say, okay, now let's look at a few key micronutrients that are really important for injury prevention and for performance and for recovery. And those are listed here. So I will say there are a lot of micronutrients that are really important for, recovery and for performance, but these I list and focus on because these are important and they are also often underconsumed in young athletes. So that's the key. They're often underconsumed. So I like to focus on them to help you think through where we can get these nutrients and how we can get them. So the first one I really want to focus on is calcium. We need calcium for bone strength. It is a key nutrient for building strong bones, preventing things like stress injuries, stress fractures. And so I talk to athletes a lot about calcium. It is often underconsumed because you're getting busier, you're getting more in your sport, you've got school. And at the same time, once you hit 9 years old, your needs jump up to 1,300 milligrams a day. So they go from about 900 milligrams a day when you're younger than 9. All of a sudden, they're at 1,300 milligrams. And that's a really big jump. And so I like to talk about this with my families and just help you navigate this to make sure you can meet your needs. I put about 4 to 6 servings of a calcium-containing food a day would meet this 1,300 milligram a day goal. And that really depends on where you're getting it from. So if you're getting your calcium from dairy sources, there's more calcium per serving and it's well absorbed. So you may not need as many of the foods. You may not need as many servings. But if you get more of your calcium from non-dairy sources like those listed here, then you're going to need either more servings or larger servings because there's just not as much per serving. And then there's other components in the food that make it hard to be absorbed. So I always recommend food first, especially if I have an athlete that is struggling to meet their energy needs for the day. Because if we can, just say, let's focus on increasing some calcium containing foods, it's also going to increase their energy intake. And then we've, knocked off two things with one focus. So I really like that. But I work with a lot of athletes that can't get it through food. And in that, if that is your athlete or that's you that is watching this, then you can supplement. And I do that I recommend supplements for many athletes. Sometimes we'll start with a supplement and then they get a feel for the calcium containing foods they like and they drop it. And that's great. So it's not something you have to do forever if your intake can improve. The main thing I say with a calcium supplement is you don't want to take more than 500 milligrams at once because your body will not absorb more than 500 at once. So we want to make sure we space it out. I did also get some questions about supplements in my Q&A, and I don't have a slide on that tonight. We do have a handout that I believe Monique is going to get out to everyone that talks about supplement and supplement safety. So you will be getting that as a resource. Okay, the next micronutrient that I talk about is vitamin D. Vitamin D is also really key for bone health. And I explain this to my athletes as calcium and vitamin D are a team. So we need calcium is what goes in the bone and helps build it and make it strong. And vitamin D aids in its absorption. So we need both of those to be optimized. We could have a great vitamin D level, but we're not getting any calcium in our intake. And then we're still at risk for weak bones and injuries because the bone is ready, but there's no calcium to come in. The flip side, you could have a great calcium intake, but your vitamin D is super low, and the calcium is there waiting to be used and enter the bone, but it can't. So we really want to make sure both of these are optimal. For your kind of as an FYI, I put the DRI of how much vitamin D is needed a day for 9 to 18-year-olds. This is typically could be found in a multi for a child or teen. If you have low vitamin D, if you've seen your pediatrician or a sports medicine physician and they've told you that your vitamin D is low, usually they're going to recommend a higher supplement. And maybe Dr. Chung could chime in on this when we get to Q&A, but typically you're recommending more for a period of time. You can see that there's not that many dietary sources of vitamin D. And even if your athlete likes these sources, they're not going to eat tons of it every day, every week. And so if you have a lower vitamin D or you've had a deficiency or insufficiency, we really recommend supplement. And then 1,000 to 2,000 is kind of what's been recommended for maintenance levels in adults. And I've done that and seen that a lot with children and teens as a maintenance level if they've had low vitamin D in the past. The next one we're going to talk about is iron. And I've been looking at iron a lot more in this last year with the young athletes that I work with, especially if they've seen me for things like stress fractures and injuries, or we think they might be under fueling. I'm looking a lot at iron, and iron is key because it's important for transport of oxygen through the body. And so it's really important if you've been feeling super tired, lethargic, like heavy legs, things like that, then it may be a sign that your iron is a little low. These are dietary sources of iron. Meat is great. Red meat, like chicken thighs, the dark meat is a great source of iron. You can get it from some vegetables and fortified cereals. These are all things you can include daily to help boost your iron intake. And then if you're getting your iron from non-meat sources, having some vitamin C with it, like orange juice or fruits, bell peppers, things like that can help with the absorption of that iron. This is one nutrient where I do not just recommend you go get a supplement. If your athlete is feeling been feeling tired, I wouldn't just run to the store and start giving them iron. I would recommend getting the iron checked by your pediatrician, by your sports medicine physician, because you can overdo iron. You could take too low of a dose and it's not going to do any good. And there are side effects that come with taking iron, usually some GI, some stomach side effects. And so I really recommend you take it and that you have someone like your physician, your sports medicine physician or sports dietitian walking along with you to help you monitor everything. Okay, so those are the micronutrients that we really need to be focusing on and looking at and making sure that they're being optimized in our athletes' intake. The third practice that I recommend to help make sure you're having that best training for the best competition is what I like to call an energy availability check. And what this is basically saying, am I getting enough calories at the end of each day, every day, to support my daily activities, to support my high level of training, and just to support growth, development, and all the physiological functions that go on in my body? I've got the technical definition for you guys. I don't expect you to do any calculations or to try to compute this, but this is more just to let you know that there is a technical clinical definition and calculation that I often do behind the scenes with any of my athletes that I worry are under fueling. And so we're basically looking at, are you, again, getting enough at the end of each day to not only support your training, but also all the other activities like your GI function, your heartbeat, growth and development, and all of that. Like I said, I don't expect you to go home and get really technical and do a lot of calculations. What you can do is monitor your habits, your fueling habits, and some signs and symptoms of low energy availability or under fueling. Some of these would be, are you getting 3 meals and 3 snacks a day? If you are a high level gymnast and you're training 3, 4+ hours in the gym almost every day, you need to be getting 3 meals and 3 snacks. If you're skipping meals, skipping snacks, you are at, I would say, at very high risk of being under fueled or in a state of low energy availability. Other signs, symptoms of being underfueled or in this state of low energy availability could be decreases in your performance, the loss of strength, feeling chronically fatigued, changes in your mood or moodiness, dizziness. Maybe you did get your iron levels checked and they are low. Oftentimes, low iron levels go hand in hand with underfueling and low energy availability. Maybe you've have a plateau in your growth, like your weight and height on your growth chart that your pediatrician has found, or even stomach complaints. Those can be a sign that an athlete is not fueling enough and they're in this state of being underfueled or low energy availability. So I like to call this out because we really want to make sure that our athletes that we're eating enough as highly competitive, elite, young athletes. You could be getting, all the lean protein and all the foods and all the food groups, but at the end of the day, if you're not eating enough of it and you're not meeting your energy needs, you're still putting yourself at risk for injury and decreased performance. So this one is really important. Okay. So the fourth practice that I want to talk about is getting a good performance nutrition strategy. And I really kind of look at this as like the second piece of the puzzle. So numbers 1, 2, and 3 are kind of the first piece of the puzzle. And then this one is the second piece of the puzzle. You need both of them to have the best outcomes in your competitions, in your meets. You need to have both of these. You could have a great performance nutrition strategy. Like, I already know all of this. I know what to eat before, during, and after. But if you haven't been doing all of those steps before, then you're still not showing up ready to compete at your best. And so we want to make sure that we've just got all the puzzle pieces together. I put on here that it can require a shift in thinking because sometimes what we think as typical, like healthy food, it may not be healthy for the athlete on the day of performance. And so I say that because really, when you're talking about performance nutrition, you're talking about the day of the meet, you're talking even the day of a hard training session what would be like healthy for the athlete is something that is well digested and provides great energy for their brain and their muscles. So the focus is digestibility and energy. And we're going to break this performance nutrition strategy down into pre-event fuel, intra-event fuel, and recovery fuel. So pre-event fuel is, of course, what we're eating before the event. It could also be before a long practice, but you can think about it whichever one works best for you, whatever you're trying to focus on. I break it down into 3 different categories based on timing. So we look at pre-event nutrition, 3 hours before a warm-up. We look at an hour and a half, or maybe you have 15 to 30 minutes before you warm up. 3+ hours before warm-up, you can include some protein, you can include some more complex carbs because your body has more time to digest these foods. And we know these foods take longer to digest and for the body to use for energy. So we can incorporate things like maybe some chicken or a higher protein yogurt, those higher protein foods, and then carbohydrates that have more fiber, whole grains, things like that, because your body has more time to digest them. Now, if you get a little closer to warm up and you have like an hour to an hour and a half, then we really want a little bit simpler and complex carbohydrates. And I've also seen this named fast carbs and slow carbs, and I also like that. So simple is like your fast carbs, complex could be more your slow carbs. So really, when you're getting closer to the event, like an hour to an hour and a half out, you want to start dropping the protein, start dropping those things that take longer for the body to digest. And then when you're 15 to 30 minutes before, we want to focus on the simpler or more quicker digesting carbohydrates. And so I've given some categories here for you guys to give you some ideas to start brainstorming. And I also like to remind, just kind of a note, that this is the general recommendation. So 3 hours before, an hour to an hour and a half, 15 to 30 minutes. I always encourage athletes to definitely try things out, know what works for you, because you maybe could handle a little bit of protein an hour before, whereas a teammate cannot tolerate any. And so we just have to try things out and play around with it, but starting out with this as your guide. Okay, the next one would be your intra-nutrition, and this is like between events, or it could be during long practices. So if you're looking at, okay, what kind of nutrition do I need to fuel these really long, 3-4 hour practices? That's our fast carbs. That's our simpler carbs. If you have 15 minutes, 10 minutes to go get something to replenish your carbohydrate stores, then we want something like I've listed here, like maybe applesauce pouches work really well for athletes I've worked with. Pretzels, you could do dry cereal. I think pouches work really well. Sometimes a sports drink can be really helpful, just a regular sports drink, because it has those quick carbohydrates to get energy and carbohydrate levels up. Now, if we're looking at between events, like you're competing and you've got certain time between events, I would really go back to that previous slide here that we just talked about. And you think about, okay, well, how much time do I have between events or between training sessions if it's multiple training sessions in a day? If you have 3 hours, we would use that as your guide, an hour to an hour and a half or 15 to 30 minutes. And there's some ideas here. I did get a bunch of pre-submitted questions about what are some snack ideas, some meal ideas, and I hope that these slides are giving you some ideas and at least some places to start. If not, we can talk more about it at the end. And then we've got recovery nutrition and our recovery fuel, because just because a training session or an event is over, that does not mean that we don't want to be intentional with our nutrition, especially if we, finished our session or competing at night and we're going to turn around, we're going to get back up really early in the morning and we're going to work again, we're going to compete or we're going to train. Recovery fuel is really important. So what I've listed here, there are 3 key components to recovery nutrition, and that's protein, which is going to repair the muscle from just the wear and tear that happens with your workouts. You need carbohydrates, which is going to replenish those depleted carbohydrate or glycogen stores in the muscle. And then we need fluid because we need to rehydrate. And so this is what we want to think about. I got a good question about hydration, and the question was around, is water always the best hydration drink? And my answer to that would be, it depends on the scenario that we're talking about. This would be a scenario where I would say, if you're just having water, then not necessarily. Water would not be, if you're just having water after a performance or a long event, we wouldn't just want water. Something like a chocolate milk would be a great hydrating recovery drink because it's got all three components needed for ideal recovery fuel. So that's protein, carbohydrate, and fluid. And I think chocolate milk also has the calcium. It's also got, some sodium, it's got potassium, it's got those electrolytes that your body probably needs as well. So that would be one time where I would choose something other than water. Now, if you have a recovery snack, you've got actual food that you're using, then of course you can have the water with it. But just keep that in mind for recovery. The other situation where I would say we would want more than water is if you are in a long practice and you didn't bring any snacks to fuel you through that 3-4 hour practice. In that situation, we would want I would recommend something like a regular sports drink. So not a sugar-free sports drink, because that means there's no carbohydrates, and that's not going to help get your energy levels up. You just want a regular carbohydrate that has carbohydrates, or a regular sports drink that has the carbohydrates from sugar. And then it's also got those electrolytes that you're going to lose through sweat. So those would be two instances where I would recommend something other than water for an athlete. Okay, so that was the 4 key practices that I always recommend, and I would recommend to you guys as you're out there training, and whether it's getting ready for competition or it's going into competition, we want to remember this each day. We want to make sure we're building that solid foundation. We want to get those micronutrients. We want to make sure that we are not underfueling, that we're getting enough energy at the end of each day, every day. And we want to have that performance strategy in place so that when we show up to compete, there's nothing new to our body. Our body knows the nutrition it's going to give us. There's no surprises, and we can go out there and we're ready to do our best. I'm going to turn it over to Monique in just a minute. I think we had some potential questions submitted, but there were 3 questions that really stood out to me that were pre-submitted, and I wanted to go through those quickly because it's either a question that I get actually a lot of people ask me, or it was one that I just thought was a great one that everyone should hear. So the first question was, what nutrients are most important to build muscle with picky eaters? So I get the question about building muscle a lot. And what I would say here is that even if your athlete is a picky eater, you're still going to need these 3 key parts, these 3 key nutrients. And that's first and foremost, you've got to be eating enough calories. So you have to be eating enough. You have to make sure you're not in an underfueled state. So we want to be meeting our energy needs. And oftentimes we actually need to increase our energy intake to help build that muscle, but we certainly don't want to be underfueling. The second one is that, of course, we need protein to build that muscle, because protein is what builds muscle, of course. And then another key component is carbohydrates. So I get a lot of athletes that they really focus on the protein, but they kind of forget about increasing their overall intake. And a lot of athletes I work with forget about the carbohydrate component. But we've got to have the carbohydrates as energy so the body can use the protein for building muscle. So the body can use protein and carbohydrates, both of those, for energy, but it can only build muscle with protein. So what we don't want is to get so focused on protein that we forget the carbohydrates, and then our body has to basically divide up the protein. Some of it's broken down and used for energy, and some of it's used to build muscle. What we want to do is make sure we're giving it the carbohydrates as well, so that when it gets the protein, it can fully use that for the job of building muscle, and then it can use the carbohydrates for energy, for replenishing depleted energy stores, and for using energy like to go into your next training session, something like that. So that's another reason why both protein and carbohydrate are key in a recovery snack. Now, so these are the main key factors for anyone, regardless of your appetite. If you are a picky eater, if you have an athlete who is a more picky eater, I would go back to that meal guide that we talked about in the very beginning of building a foundation, and really have your athlete go through and look at what are some protein options we like, what are the carbohydrates, and then use that to help build snacks and meals that help build that muscle. And if you're on the session tonight and you have more questions about this, please feel free to enter it in the Q&A. Okay, the next question that I received was, how does elevation affect hydration and eating? For example, if the athlete trains in Dallas, but the meet is in Denver. And this was another, I mean, they're all great questions, but not one I could naturally cover within the presentation tonight. And so I think Dr. Chung and I may tag team on this one a little bit, but I thought I would go ahead and just kind of give you a little bit of, what's happening at elevation, at a high elevation, like if you're competing in Colorado, and how can this affect nutrition? And then I'm going to see if Dr. Chung may want to add some information in there for you guys. But overall, what's happening, there's less oxygen up there. If there's less oxygen in the air, it can change the energy pathway that the body is going to use. We have our aerobic and anaerobic system, so there's less oxygen now, and our body is going to focus mostly on, it's going to rely on carbohydrates actually for creating energy for the body. Because there's less oxygen, our body's working harder. It's putting more stress on the body, even at rest. So our body's working harder even when it's resting. Because we're at this higher elevation, it's also increasing respiration. We're working harder, we're breathing, our respiration increases. It's also going to increase our need to use the restroom, which is going to increase our risk of dehydration. So that was kind of a brief overview. And then I look at how does that increase our nutrient needs. And basically what we want to think about is we need increased fluid. So we want to make sure that we are actually increasing our fluid some. We're increasing our fluid. We're bringing our water bottle. We are doing what we always do and even more when it comes to hydrating. You may feel hungrier. That's very likely because you're burning more energy because it's just a little bit more stressful on the body. So I would plan for bringing some more snacks. I would plan on adding a little bit to your meals. And then sometimes it can help to increase like healthy fats because it just has a little bit more energy in it. If you're worried you're going to have trouble meeting your energy needs. Increasing our carbohydrates, we know those are key for gymnasts anyway. Carbohydrates are a key macronutrient for energy for gymnasts. And then we know the body, excuse me, is going to need even more of those at a higher elevation. And then I also put antioxidants because we know just for everyone, antioxidants fight stress in the body. And so we can add, maybe your carbohydrates, your additional carbohydrates come from fresh fruits and from vegetables, or you make sure you're taking your multivitamin, but really making sure we're getting those antioxidants in because it can help fight just the stressful state that your body's in. So it's kind of an overview, but I know there's more because I also included on here like iron and going into a higher elevation does change our blood volume and it gets really more detailed, but we have an increased iron need. So we want to make sure we're also eating iron-rich foods before and while we're there. And so you can go back to that iron slide. And I also have it mentioned here as well, just to make sure we're getting that iron in our daily intake. Dr. Chung, did you want to add something right now to this?
Yes. Yes, I absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Chung. I'm a pediatric sports medicine physician at Scottish Rite. So, great talk, Taylor. I think a few things I would add. So, as you said, um, at higher altitude, you are in it's hypoxia, right? So there's less oxygen that's available with decreased pressure that we see at higher elevations, and so the body kind of knows that it needs to, search for more oxygen. And so our kidneys actually will secrete something called EPO, which is called erythropoietin. And that stimulates increased red blood cell production in our bodies, hence increasing hemoglobin concentration, which are the cells that carry oxygen to deliver to our tissues. However, that takes about 2 to 4 plus weeks until the athlete can see the effects. And so, if you're going to Denver or some high elevation place for a competition, um, you know, I would not depend on your body to make those changes because it will take time for the body to acclimatize to that. And so, I often tell athletes if you're competing at a higher altitude place and you don't have the time to allow your body to acclimatize, then you want to compete as soon as possible as you arrive to your destination. So, less than 24 hours. Or if you have the time, get there, 2 weeks or so to allow your body to acclimatize. As Taylor mentioned, some of the negative effects of altitude on performance is dehydration is the main thing. You're breathing faster, your respiratory rate is higher, you're going to be peeing more. And so, hydrating is super important so that the athlete doesn't fall behind on their fluid. Also, the body is going to be having less power output, decreased training intensity, just because it needs to get adjusted to not having, the oxygen at the same pressure level that the body's used to. And so, you talked about iron, which is super important. And it's not one of those things where you all of a sudden start taking high iron and the day before you get to competition at a location that's at a high altitude. It's got to be built into your daily habits where you're training your body, you're incorporating all of these things on a regular basis so that your body is ready to perform and compete at its highest level. And so that's something that's super important. You can't just all of a sudden, a week or two before your performance competition or your meet, try to make these adjustments because it takes time, it takes practice. You also want to figure out what your body can tolerate in terms of complex carbs, simple carbs, protein, how much and when, and how it digests in your stomach.
Great. Okay, so there's one other question that I wanted to go ahead and touch on because I work with a lot of athletes that do struggle with this. And it is, how do we help our athlete who's on ADHD medication navigate the low appetite during the day and bigger appetite at night when the medication wears off? This is a question that I get from a handful of athletes. It's pretty common that I see this come across, my consult room. And my response to this would be that it is hard. So it's really hard when you have your appetite suppressed during the day and you're trying to fuel, and you've got to fuel really well for high intensity training and sport. What I would say, it's honestly, my answer to this is similar to a lot of high performing elite young athletes. A lot of these athletes are training hours and hours a day. They're doing schoolwork, they're going to school, they've got other commitments, and their appetite, it's hard to get all of the food in. They aren't thinking about it, or they're nervous about sport or a test. They're training really hard, so their body temperature's up and then their appetite's suppressed. And so it's really easy to forget or just to not think about the needed meals and snacks. And so what I would tell someone in this situation is really similar to a lot of my athletes. And it is, you've got to make a plan and stick to it. So sit down, decide when is the best time for breakfast, when is the best time for lunch, when is the best time for dinner, when are the best times for snacks, work it around your training schedule, your school schedule. And some of my athletes put it in their planner, they set an alarm, and it's kind of just it's part of the conditioning. It's part of what they have to do as an athlete to be their best. Now, You can do things like really make breakfast count. I was talking to Dr. Chung about this. Making breakfast count in the morning when the appetite might be higher can be really helpful and really make that meal count. Other things, make your plan, stick to it, but I recommend really incorporating those foods that the athlete really enjoys during the day. So it's hard enough to make yourself eat when you aren't hungry, but it's a little bit easier if it's something that the athlete is excited to eat or really enjoys. And then maybe the foods that they're less excited about can go later on in the day when the appetite starts to pick up. But I just try to remind the athlete that just because that appetite trigger is suppressed and you're not getting that message to the brain of I'm hungry, I need to eat, doesn't mean that the body doesn't need to eat. So we've got to remember that just because your brain isn't telling you I'm hungry, that doesn't mean that suddenly your muscles, are full of carbohydrate and are ready to go train. Like your muscles are still depleted. And so we've got to fuel them. You've got to eat to get those energy levels up, to fill your muscles with carbohydrates, to get the protein you need to maintain strength and to feel good and energized. We've still got to get it. So just remembering that and really try to say, okay, what are the favorite foods? What are the things we're excited to eat that taste really good, and put those in the middle of the day, like around lunch and those middle of the day snacks when your appetite is lowest. And then there's other things that we can, talk about higher energy foods and snacks that you can make. And there's other options to help add in energy into meals and snacks. But that's overall what I would recommend for that question.
I agree with you, Taylor. I think few things that I would just add to. As you said, I always tell parents because most of these kids take the meds in the morning. I always say breakfast should be the most important meal of the day. Try to eat it 30 minutes before taking the medication. Um, Other thing is, as you said, have them eat the snacks that they like. Take your kid grocery shopping. Have them pick out the snacks that they really would like to eat, especially when they're not feeling as hungry. And some of the kids, if they're losing weight or just not getting enough during the day, sometimes like a snack before bedtime, like a bedtime protein smoothie, or having like a little snack such as like a peanut butter jelly sandwich and a glass of milk can also help kind of catch up with some of those energy availability and calories that they may have missed during the day. And then if all of that doesn't help and your child is losing weight, they're not eating because their appetite is so suppressed and they're just not getting the fuel that they need to perform, then you can talk to your pediatrician to consider switching to like a non-stimulant medication for ADHD. So there's a lot of good options in the market now. There's like Clonfacine, Strattera, just clonidine. There's different medications that are non-stimulant medications that don't have the appetite suppressing side effect. And so that is something to consider, discussing with your child's pediatrician as well too.
All right. So those were my three questions that I wanted to make sure we addressed. And I think we got to most of the pre-submitted questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Monique if there's any other questions that Dr. Chung or I can address if we have time.
Yeah, we
Happy
there
to
were
do
two
that.
questions submitted, and so one of them was asking kind of about are chips and Gatorade okay for the gymnast to eat during practice?
So I would say that I mean, it depends kind of how much time you have, what you've had before, and your overall nutrition plan. I like Gatorade. I'm a fan. I mean, you can make your own sports drinks. There's different things you can do. I am a fan of sports drinks, regular sports drinks, because they provide the carbohydrate, they provide the electrolytes, and they provide the fluid, and they're often something that the athlete wants to drink, and so it'll get them really hydrated and fueled. I think it kind of depends on the chip. If we're just breaking it down into macronutrients, you know, they need carbohydrates is what they need. And so if it's like a baked lay, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Um, it's breaking down into carbohydrate. I don't believe there isn't like any fiber in there. It should be no fat, or very I don't think there's a lot of fat or any fat in baked lays. I'd have to check. But this is kind of just keep in mind of what I'm thinking. Like we don't want fiber, we don't want protein, and we don't want fat in those quick snacks. Now, if you've got an hour or so and your body can digest it, that's different. But if it's like a quick, we've got 10, 15 minutes, I would just do something quickly digested. So, I mean, some people will do like a bagel. They'll just grab maybe sports drink, you could grab a bagel or half a bagel or whatever you need, whatever you tolerate to get those carbohydrate levels back up. Um, if it's a chip that's like high in fat and fiber, I would stay away from it because I don't think it's going to fuel your body well, and it's not going to give you the energy that you need as quickly as you need it to go back into a session. Um, but I also, I think things like where I put pretzels. I mean, you could have like maybe baked chips, but we just want that carbohydrate, that quick to digest carbohydrate, like pretzels, goldfish, and for some it is Gatorade. But if you have a carbohydrate snack, then you might be fine with water. So that'd be something that I would analyze more specifically with the athlete to see exactly how much carbohydrate they need, fluid and that sort of thing. And then I would answer that question a little bit more specifically.
Thank you for that, Taylor. We have another question. They submitted, says, my daughter has MTHR and has made it difficult for her for fueling. We found that her iron level is low. She cannot have anything fortified. What do you suggest?
So you're saying she cannot have, sorry, her iron is low.
Her iron is low and she cannot have anything fortified. What
Okay.
do you suggest?
And can she eat those foods like meat, um, the vegetables that are high in iron?
I don't
Okay.
I
Well,
don't
it's so if I mean honestly she's going to get the best. There's like one fortified product that I've seen that's really really high in iron, which is actually Quaker Instant Grits. But if she or he can eat meat, that dark meat is going to be higher in iron. Your red meat will have iron, but also chicken, some of your fish, and then like dark leafy greens, your beans, things like that, those are going to be great sources of iron. Um, those are going to be
Right.
excellent sources of iron, and they wouldn't need the fortified foods.
Okay. Yeah,
I
she
hope
said she's
that's
very picky, so and she cannot have anything that is fortified. So that's how she's trying to find ideas on how to fuel
okay.
her iron levels up.
Yes. So, and in that instance, I would probably work with your pediatrician or sports medicine physician, sports dietitian, because they can really get into the details. And, you might, if you've had, depends on what your iron is, we'd have to look at that. But, someone would have to look at that and say you might need an iron supplement to help you out if you truly don't include enough foods to get your iron up. And I don't know, Dr. Chung, if you have any thoughts on that, please chime in. But that's my thought there. It sounds like you have an instance where it would be good to work with someone who can really look at your athlete's intake and say, here's how much iron you're getting. Here's where we need to be. Let's see if we can get you to meet it through foods and beverages that are, not fortified foods, like your whole foods, and beverages. And if not, or if your iron level is too low, so I mean, if your iron level is too low, you will need a supplement in some cases.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think you'd want to know what, your child's exact iron level is, also ferritin level, which is the body's storage of iron. Oftentimes those, are very low in some of our athletes, and that can lead to fatigue, decreased performance. But there are cases where if the ferritin or the iron level is low, supplement might not even be enough, and sometimes those kids may need like an IV infusion or something like that. And so I think it's really important to kind of, follow with your child or your athlete's pediatrician or sports medicine provider, and then work closely with a registered sport dietitian. Um, and then also trying to, if they can't take, supplements, then trying to take, um, incorporate foods that are rich in iron. And sometimes, eating a lot of iron, can be hard on the athlete too, but making things up like, pork chops with applesauce and seasoned dark leafy greens or some things like that that the child may enjoy that's more flavorful, trying to incorporate. But definitely would want to know what the iron level is so that you know, they're getting it obviously through food and through nutrition, and diet is the best, but oftentimes, you know, that may not be enough.
Thank you, Dr. Chun. Yes, the mom commented that the doctor did suggest a supplement. The ferritin was 14, just so you know.
Yes, that's a low ferritin. I try to encourage athletes to have their ferritin level be more closer to, you know, 40s and 50s, especially if they're high level training athlete, because it's super important for, you know, utilization for the body for energy and overall performance.
And one thing I would add, like for supplements, sometimes I'd mention this when I talked about iron, about how it can have some like stomach side effects. It can cause upset stomach or like constipation. And so if your athlete is starting an iron supplement, then I would really definitely also make sure you're watching their fluid intake. Want to make sure they're meeting their fluid goals, getting hydrated. They may need to increase their fluid intake a little bit and getting a variety of sources of fiber. So the whole grains, the fruits, the vegetables. But first, we want to make sure their water is high. You never want to increase fiber before you increase fluid. So that could make it worse. So we want to make sure they're getting their fluid, meeting their fluid needs, and then they're also getting a variety of fiber-rich foods, and that could help with any side effects of an iron supplement.
I agree. And then taking it with like a glass of orange juice or something like that to help with a better absorption of the iron is something I would recommend too.